Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, NFV and SDN Market Update, Progress and Challenges, with TBR Telecom Executive Analyst Michael Sullivan-Trainor. I'm Justin Sargent, and I'll be hosting today's session. Insights from today's presentation are shared from TBR's NFV and SDN Market Landscape, Telecom Software Mediated Networks Customer Adoption Study, and TBR's NFV and SDN Market Forecast. If you'd like to learn more about this research, please reach out to myself or Michael after the presentation. Now, before we begin, there are a few things I'd like to cover. First, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube channel, TBR channel. I encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the previous presentations we've recorded. Second, I'll be following up with all of you tomorrow afternoon via email with the recording for today's presentation, as well as with the slides from today's webinar. So please be on the lookout for that. And finally, we welcome questions from the audience at the end of our presentation. Please send any questions you have through the Q&A function, preferably not the chat function, as it's easier for us to sort through. We will address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Michael to get into the content for today's webinar.
Thank you, Justin. So this is Michael Sullivan-Trainor, Executive Analyst at Telecom Practice for Technology Business Research. Have been following telecom for about 20 years with experience both on the vendor side and in market research for a number of those years. And myself and my team have been closely following the NFV SDN developments and operators for the last few years. And this presentation was going to give insight into the findings of our ongoing research streams into the activity around NFV and SDN, particularly for telecom operators who are advancing and changing their business models with this technology. So with that said, we'll get started. We're going to look at the status of deployment or adoption of NFV SDN. We believe that commercial deployment is on the horizon. We'll speak specifically to the evidence of that. In understanding how that adoption is taking place, we're seeing three paths to understand how the adoption is being activated by operators. And then there are a number of roadblocks and gateways to accelerate that deployment, both in NFV and SDN. So we'll highlight what those are. And then we'll talk a little bit about our market forecast for how this market's going to develop going forward, and certainly we see a larger and larger investment beyond 2018, deeper into the next 5-year time frame. And last but not least, we'll cover the winning strategies that we see for some of the players that are getting early traction with this commercial deployment, are positioned to do so as we go forward. So with that said, we'll move to the commercial deployment on the horizon. We are in a state of commercial pre-deployment where we see many of the proof of concepts going toward a pre-deployment state, many of the early requests for proposal going to pre-deployment. One of our benchmarks for this is our customer study. We will highlight at the end of this presentation some of the concrete portfolio items in the research stream. One of them, which is a lot of the findings we want to reveal here, is from our customer study of more than 50 managers and executives across the top 20 Tier 1 operators, specifically on their NFV and SDN adoption plans. So to highlight that, we are looking at the first crucial question, basically the when of adoption of NFV. We're somewhat surprised to find that there's a strong expectation that within the next 2 years, by 2017, we're going to see significant investment of commercial deployment in NFV. So as I said, their commercial pre-deployment today, rather small percentage of operators and small volume. Going into a higher volume in 2016, but really based on this study and other data points, the real ramp is 2017, 2018. We have identified more than 50 operators that have already NFV activities. and as I mentioned, a large share of commercial deployments or controlled deployments, and again, the volume. So the majority of our survey base says within the next 3 to 4 years, this will be a core of their deployment. And then the few early adopters looking at even within this year or the next 1 or 2 years. And there we can cite data points like AT&T being one of the operators that's done substantial commercial deployment already within the 2015 timeframe. So we can see there are a few operators that are on the front end of this, but a large portion of Tier 1s are moving towards deployment fairly rapidly over the next couple of years. That's the key takeaway from this slide, and I think very important to have that data point at this point in the evolution of NFV and SDN, which has gone through a real rapid stepping up of activity since earlier this year even, since the early ETSI activity and since the early activity at some of the supplier and operator presentations and strategy discussions even in the last 12 to 18 months. So this is a very serious and valuable and clearly relatively high-speed phenomenon for the telecom industry. What are some of the triggers to adoption? Why do people do this? Well, there's, of course, the grand solution expected of lowering the cost of service as the strategic trigger for this activity. So to my mind and in our research, that serves as the umbrella for the activity. But what specifically then triggers where those investments are being made and how they're being made? Clearly, the proof of cost reduction, although there's a revenue benefit expected, the proof of cost reduction through either reduced time to provision service, which impacts the OpEx, or CapEx reduction for a different format for the hardware, basically consolidated hardware, more software-related software-defined services on fewer devices, essentially. That cost reduction is still the leading catalyst, and we believe we're finding that from the operators because that's the sort of the easiest to prove, easiest to show one of these transformations. Harder to demonstrate OpEx savings because of the other aspects of the network that are affected. The total OpEx expenditure of the operator is hard to influence when you're just doing a relatively small deployment. However, you can demonstrate in a relatively small deployment that you've reduced the hardware for that particular service, for example. So we believe CapEx-driven cost reduction is a key realization and driver. Virtual CPE deployments are probably one of the most popular ways that's being demonstrated right now. But also we see other reasons here. We see capacity upgrade and the implementation of new service as taking the part of the value, part of the triggering. And by that we've come to understand that operators look at a strategy of moving to a software-defined network, so many of the things that would be otherwise implemented with the legacy implementations are becoming implemented with either partial or full NFV or SDN deployment. Areas such as VoLTE, voice over LTE is an area where we're seeing there's a necessary view to do that as a strategic imperative, so why not do it with a lower cost base expectation, new technology, try out the NFV SDN value proposition and technology. Similarly, some early IoT deployments, Internet of Things, where new network investments are required to stand up new services or support new initiatives. Those are receiving a NFV flavored deployment. And then last, good old capacity upgrade. In this environment, we know the data is probably the one thing that is growing at a double-digit rate, while revenue and cost are not necessarily. So we see the movement to upgrade capacity. For instance, we're going to change the way edge capacity is deployed for a CDN or a content delivery network or a video service. So since that capacity upgrade is needed anyway, again, let's look at where SDN can give us a benefit, or when NFV and SDN combined can give us a benefit and put a deployment there. So triggers are not in areas that are surprising. Operators are going about their business, deploying new services, upgrading capacity. So that is an obvious case for why this is being triggered. And then there is the pure experimentation of the POC turning into the commercial pre-deployment, understanding that the cost reduction is going to offer a benefit, is another trigger. So those are three we think that are going to continue to drive this forward. All that said, there is still not a depth of business cases that support the total cost of ownership expectations that operators have. A business case that goes beyond a single domain or a single service or a single normal sort of, we're going to do the capacity upgrade, we're going to do the deployment of a new service. Those business cases kind of self-justify for that isolated incident, but the operators are stepping back strategically saying NFV SDN is going to be a big bang. That expectation is still out there. Business cases that really illustrate the big bang impact of NFV SDN are still some lacking. Part of that's collecting the evidence from the commercial pre-deployments and proof of concepts. Part of it, as we'll see in a few minutes, there's a number of other factors in the operator that needs to be addressed in order to achieve the full benefits of NFV and SDN on a company basis. So we go from triggers then to understand, so what is the map of advancement in deployment of NFV SDN? And in this slide, we show a maturity model where basically we're seeing there's going to be mainstream adoption. We peg it at 2020. By that we mean not just by volume of operator, but volume of portions of the network, which implies volume of CapEx and OpEx spend. And we'll come to more specifics about quantifying that when we come to the market forecast part of the presentation. What's here is to understand the movement from what we're seeing as they're calling the proof of concept stage. For many tier ones, the proof of concept stage is coming to an end with an objective of, okay, what's next? Do they issue an RFP to go commercial? Do they go commercial with the partners that were a part of the RFP? Do they move to the pre-deployment stage and controlled commercial deployment, full commercial deployment? So once again, we see 2016, 2017 into 2018, a robust commercial deployment period, but not yet mainstream level, still on the up ramp with more distance to travel before we hit that benchmark of 2020 timeframe or the early 2020s even. We will talk a little bit about the breakdown of what different kinds of deployments look like. Here we're highlighting the deployment of discrete nodes in the network, converting nodes to NFV or SDN, some of the CO work that we've seen AT&T do, for example, or domains, lots of activity in the Evolved Packet Core, in IMS, areas that were relatively easy to bring to a state of virtualization and then begin to introduce orchestration and automation to the different applications that are within those domains. So that's what a lot of this activity is. There are significant technical challenges and organizational challenges, and because the approach has been driven by discrete domains or nodes, sometimes with different suppliers, different interpretations of standards by different suppliers, different flavors of OpenStack extensions and things of that nature, create some interoperability concerns. So some of those things need to be solved, not just with large systems integration spend, but with some improvement of the way the products are going into the market, going to the operator to take us through these stages. So we will spend some time on some of those obstacles as well. But our belief, as our adoption curve and our forecast shows, is these problems will be substantially addressed, at least in a sufficient manner, to allow the operators to go forward with the technology. So that's where we are, moving forward at a fairly aggressive rate on the beginning of an up-ramp in NFV and SDN in the operator marketplace. That's where our survey research is telling us, and all the activity going on in the marketplace tells us. That leads us to try and break that down a little bit. So what are the major roadmaps that operators are taking to understand how they should adopt NFV, SDN beyond some of the technical necessities? We say there's 3 paths to adoption, but initially we are collecting data that says there are at least 2 major ways these initiatives start, and we've created some classifications for these segments, call them domainers versus transformers. The domainers are the folks coming out of those POCs with the different ways in which benefit can be achieved, really driven by different stakeholders in operators, and really looking to get some traction on the value proposition for NFV and SDN. So they tend to pick target domains, whether that be the VPC or IMS or CPE as highlighted here. And the danger, of course, is something we've discussed, heard the community discuss, and that is creating islands of NFV and SDN, just as operators have for years created islands of discrete traditional systems that have had to be worked with and had significant integration challenges and interoperability challenges. So we believe as an industry and as operators, the goal of moving away from islands of any installation is part of the plan. So we think the domainer stage is probably an early stage. It's not going to be the long-term status of NFV and SDN. In fact, we think the transformer stage is likely to change over time. Now, here in our survey response, we see a 50-50 split pretty much between the domainers and the transformers. And I should say the transformers are those organizations that have approached this from a high-level strategic view and said we are transforming our network layer by layer where it makes sense for a total transition to a lower cost of service driven by NFV and SDN. So essentially a grand architecture approach that then gets carried out systematically with project plans at multiple layers of the network, generally simultaneously. So we see this is a strong alternative way to go about this, and so that we believe that transformer method is going to yield cost of service reduction benefits more quickly or more dramatically. Quick might not be the right word to use there, but dramatically for those operators that are in that viewpoint versus trying to gain edge in domain by each way of doing it and looking to aggregate that, and again having to encounter interoperability, other issues. The architecture approach tends to set up a governance process that reveals the issues that are going to come later in terms of things like interoperability of a multi-layered strategy, the right way to architect the orchestration, not just for that domain, and automate not just that instance of SDN at the edge, but how are they going to do it holistically across the network. So really getting hands around that and then implementing accordingly, we think will allow the greatest benefit to be achieved in the most intelligent fashion. That said, our operator audience, our customer base are doing both methods. The other point of this particular slide is we don't think operators are intentionally avoiding being holistic. They are, in some cases, doing workarounds. This is speaking to the bullet of the state of operations and the state of IT can be gating factors that sort of require the momentum of NFV to flow around them and go towards domains or areas of the network or areas of the organization that are ready to accept and move ahead in this with this technology. Gating factors are the IT organization may not be prepared for a lot of the platforming that the IT data centers will have to be staged for to support the network function environment, for example. Operations may have a hard time with a number of the changes in process required through an orchestrator and automation environment. We'll talk about some of these in a little more detail because certainly there are plenty of issues around technical implementation at this stage. So putting a little bit further color on that, we have a balance of transformers and domainers still, but we've identified a third group specifically targeting an IT-oriented approach to this environment, and that is what we're calling platformers. And this particular group focuses on the data centers and IT-led initiatives. So as you can see, we identify here different layers, different leaders and different activities towards NFV SDN. We believe this is an emerging segmentation that will be more valuable as we go forward in the volume years to come. We've already spoken to the transformers. Generally, that's a CXO-led, generally CTO, or some combination of CTO and CIO have gotten together with a chief executive officer, operations officer saying, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to be holistic. We're going to look at how we need to integrate every part of the network. We're going to have an architectural approach and deploy multiple domains in parallel and begin to address some of the more difficult issues like how do we truly implement management, automation, and orchestration, not just for a given virtualized environment, but holistically, how do we change our operational method to a MANO method? What kind of status is the data model for OSS and BSS, for service fulfillment, for network management, for bringing together all the touch points that need to happen to provision a service, to build a customer, to understand a customer, how does that relate to a network that now runs essentially, the intention is to have it run as a network on demand. There's a lot of what we call hygiene to do, the state of the inventory system, the consolidation of the data model, the way in which the virtualization is managed across IT and network environments, all these things. So there's a number of considerations that pop up in that third bullet once an architectural decision is made and the domains are designated to move forward. For the platformers, then it's starting that conversation in the data center. Is our data center architecture adequately established to deliver on the promise of NFV and SDN? Understanding there'll be a replatforming of a number of domains in distributed and centralized data centers. So what does that look like? How do we make that decision based on our regional coverage, based on the latency requirements of the services, the applications? How do we then understand things from a data center architecture approach? I think perhaps Telefonica is a good example of thinking data center first and having a platformer strategy. The staging of the VNFs and data center. Nevertheless, when it comes to operationalizing this data center infrastructure of virtual network functions, we still encounter the need to holistically view MANO and bring in the transformations necessary for OSS BSS. So that is another, we think, a strong point to attack this from. And it tends to work in organizations that feel that this should be about an IT-led or IT start that has more influence into the network environment versus an organization that might be just a top-down led holistically. And then we go back to the domainers. And the domainers, we see a lot of activity in the domainers. We saw 50% of our operators in sort of domainer status with use case-led approaches. This is almost, you could say, more finance-oriented. I should comment that operators that have a better capitalization view tend to find it easier to do a statement around redefining architecture or transformation of data center. Operators that have a lower capitalization will find it easier to do use cases where they can gather economic value quickly and gain proof of concept and gain support. So that's what's going on with the domainers. It's targeting individual virtual network functions. We believe a lot of the virtual CPE activity is just exact evidence of that. Here's a quick win and enhancement to our service for whether it's enterprise or home users, and a lower cost, faster provisioning, a number of things, a self-service portal implementation that betters the service. All these activities make it easy to see how a VNF flavor is in the CPE is a way to go. So that's where we see the movement. So we see movement across three different ways in which to address NFV and SDN, and see it happening in a number of different environments. What are some of the roadblocks and gates that remain that are causing some of the delays that many of us see in the marketplace that are mitigating some of the momentum? Certainly in the 15 and into 16 time frame, it almost feels like there are more roadblocks and gates than there are. There is progress, although we can see the vision and get the expectation of the operators. We come back to the issue of finances, the ability to really understand the return on investment, even for those that are looking at a holistic transformer view, and to a certain extent platformers, although I think platformers have a little bit of better ROI if they're able to rationalize their data center infrastructure, for instance. It's another sort of large-scale cost and operational savings. So different ROI cases get married to different operators at different states, right? The transformers versus the platformers versus the domainers. So when we take up the question of the time to achieve ROI, it's important to align that to the lens of the operator. And as we go through that with individual operators, we see significant differences. That said, we get some very interesting responses when we ask operators about, they say ROI is a major roadblock. We still need to understand it better from an NFV SDN, and by that is, okay, it's about more than cost savings. It's about more than redistributing existing spend, because at the end of the day, operators really need to drive new revenue sources. So how do they put the package together? What's their return, not just cost reduction, but benefit in terms of new service or availability of service. And the TBR take on that is there's a lot more here than we've really seen implemented so far about engaging innovative services, engaging the developer community, engaging more of a OTT-like ecosystem that we don't see enough operators focus on NFV and SDN doing. We see some of them doing that, allowing the discussion of DevOps-like processes to be part of their calculations for NFV and SDN, and we think that's part of the answer to why the ROI is harder to nail down, why the business case is harder to document. That said, what we show here is a preponderance of expectation of a 3+ year return on investment for NFV and SDN deployments, and a smaller group that expects quicker turn time in 2 years, and a still smaller group that believes that this is going to take them for a long, long time and never really see the payback. Certainly that group isn't going to win a lot of friends in finance. So we think the majority rules here. So pegging this 3 years as something to be a target, and trying to look at that not just on a per domain, but on a holistic basis. Now a little bit on to some of the challenges. The organization is perhaps the most significant challenge for most of the operators. We were interested to see that some of the early feedback from lessons learned from Telefonica was that making operations comfortable was a key value to moving things forward for that, another one of the benchmark operators moving with NFV. And that had to do with the understanding that this is a different way to implement reliability and service quality in the network. It's a redefinition of service level agreements, moving to the best practices in reliability and management and operations from a cloud way of doing business or doing technical implementation, moving to that away from the hard-coded 5 nines proprietary, tightly defined reliability and accountability that exists in the networks from a legacy standpoint. That's where operations gets very uncomfortable and has to be helped with. What we say here is it's not just saying, okay, you're going to adopt IP practices, thank you very much, and if you don't, you're out. It's understanding there is a hybrid IT and cloud best practice, or what I like to say is cloud adapted to a telecom environment. And that's, I think, a learning that's taking a little time to digest what that is. It takes a particular focus of the vendor and operator expertise to bridge the gap between those two. It can't simply be trying to stand up a cloud container that is otherwise going to do network functions and everything's going to be fine. The level of complexity, the interoperability requirements, management operations requirements at the scale and latency and customer expectations of the network all need to be considered alongside of what the benefits of virtualization and automation and orchestration can do. And that's a learning that I see happening almost every day, every month I talk to operators about this and the suppliers alongside them. So this reorienting of staff, this organizational change, as the survey says, profound focus on human capital migration to understand and implement NFV and SDN. Of course, trying to alter the view that this is job threatening. It is more job repositioning. There needs to be for operators where it can be. The second big issue, integration of a hybrid environment. We've also seen in recent months that it's possible to stand up a well-defined, reliable in telco terms NFV, SDN environment across different layers of the network for different kinds of services, but doing that as a greenfield or independent of the legacy environment doesn't work, doesn't let the scale that's required happen. This leads to the discussion of how you truly bring things like MANO across the infrastructure so it can recognize the benefits of and deliver service provisioning appropriately across the physical network as well as the virtual version of the network. And so it's not surprising that integration of new and legacy is seen as a major challenge and a major requirement here. And then we'll come back to cost. I think we've already talked a lot about the cost, return on investment, cost reduction expectations. Operators are definitely not looking at this as a need to make a big spend and hope for payback. It really has to be very concrete how the economics of this will shake out to deliver on the longer-term economic benefits that are expected. Okay, so we've talked then about the state of adoption. We've talked about some of the nuances of the ways in which adoption is taking place and some of the chief obstacles that are being aggressively addressed by operators to advance the adoption, get through this teething stage of NFV and SDN into some volume. We believe that substantial progress will be made by in the next couple of years on this. So we say 2018, trying to look beyond 2018 for a market that has substantial breadth and depth to it. So here we see our market forecast for NFV and SDN, where we have documented significant spend, even a few $1 billion on a global scale as early as this year to hitting the double digits in terms of the billions in 2016 and then scaling rather significantly up. And where's this money coming from? We're often asked, and we often say that according to our operator research, it's a redistribution of CapEx and OpEx. We see that trailing off of other kinds of investments in the network, while operators are not ready to shut down legacy or retire legacy. They are ready to not continue investing in legacy. So this is, as we've seen in the early part of the presentation, a movement of spend away from capacity upgrade traditional to capacity upgrade new, away from a new service deployed on legacy to a new service deployed on NFV SDN infrastructure, designed according to ideally a grander strategy of architectural multi-layer deployment. So there's an evolution here of the network across domains, across stacks to an NFV SDN performing operating network. And that's how we see it moving forward in the coming years, and why we have significant spend happening out in 2020. Out of what I should mention is a global view of all operator CapEx, topping out at around $350 billion. So it's no small budget the global market, if we look at it that way, is working with, which is gradually being redeployed, distributed towards NFV and SDN. So we're still optimistic, even with limited examples of ROI, even with the technical challenges. Why? Really, the second bullet there, more and more of our discussion suggests that operators feel they have to move there. We are increasingly seeing them understand that there's an operator A state, which is present day form at a certain cost of service expense, at a certain boundary around revenue acquisition, and an operator B state. And an operator B state has a lower cost of service and a more flexible, broader set of opportunities around revenue streams. And operators at an executive level don't want to be the last operator, be operator A. They would like to actually be closer to being one of the first operators to be operator B. And it's going to happen in a market near them. And so this is a driver that is going to continue to bring momentum to this kind of spend redistribution for the foreseeable future. You can argue about the speed and how quickly certain challenges will be overcome and where transformation will occur first in the network, but it definitely will occur and will continue to carry momentum. And that's really the understanding here. Concretely, in the sort of market research methodology way of doing this, we've looked at individual domains and forecast this as a buildup of domains for operator spend. We have deep CapEx and OpEx model analysis in our research streams from which we've built this that documents what the legacy is, and now we're documenting what the transformation is. So to that point, we have here a little bit of the segmented view. We've looked at the total dollars that can be gleaned from the redistribution and isolated it. This is a snapshot of the NFV CapEx only, and it includes some of the more popular domain aspects here that indicates where some of the spend is occurring. There's a lot of other spend there. There's a lot of SDN use cases in that. There's a lot of transformations in areas of the network and the data center that might be thought of to be in the other, but we did try and isolate some of the spend aggregation around MANO, including the work that needs to be done holistically in MANO into the OSS/BSS, pinpointed some of the key use cases, virtual content delivery networks, virtual IMS, virtual evolved packet core, virtual base station, which there is some activity there, and virtual CPE. So this is another way to understand the market and target where to address resources, address value. So we perceive that operators are wading into these domains, both under the umbrella of architecture and with a lack thereof, and working to do a profound amount of virtualization, new servers, x86 servers, and new software, retiring and choosing to redistribute from legacy. But we believe there will be a mass migration in the future for a number of these domains. We see data points like again, AT&T saying that most of their EPCs are going to become virtual EPCs, and they're well along the road to do that, as an example. So that is the snapshot that we can give you in this limited time window of the state of the operators and their movement towards NFV and SDN. We'll highlight a little bit more about how we're doing, moving further with the research there towards the end of the presentation. But before we do, I want to pause and to spend a few moments with how we see some of the suppliers activated by this operator activity and what we call some of the winning strategies. In our research stream, the customer study, we also asked operators, these top 20 tier ones, their perception of who is best positioned in various areas to deliver on NFV and SDN. This was the result we got based on the percentage of respondents with a very high percentage expectation, and we have to understand it is a tier one operator installed base where Ericsson is strong, and it's therefore perhaps not that surprising that Ericsson's perceived as a high scorer here, followed by other OEMs, Huawei, Alcatel-Lucent, Cisco, Juniper, Nokia, even ZTE, and what we would consider to be the IT players, to whom this represents a relatively new and larger opportunity, were not perceived as necessarily best positioned. Part of the reason for this, we believe, is in this early stage, the teeth-cutting stage of NFV SDN, there is a request, an expectation that the trusted partners, the people that the operators have been dancing with up until now, are the best ones who will understand them when they say, this is complex. Help me, I need to move. By the way, you can't do it with your own proprietary systems. You have to do it with IT. Go talk to the IT players, or go invent your own version of IT best practice and bring it to me to solve this problem. We're moving away from the legacy way of doing it, but it still is the function that you have delivered to us in the past. So you understand our latency issues, you understand our reliability issues, you understand our integration issues, you understand our holistic network issues. All of that is within our trust area with you, so we're trusting you to help carry us forward. We believe that's a lot of what's going on here. Another data point on that was just highlighted the other day with, although AT&T picked Affirmed and Metaswitch as examples of third parties to introduce to it, they chose Nokia to be part of their Domain 2.0. So the OEMs keep appearing as these large projects move forward, and we believe that's the reason. We believe this is a phase-limited situation, though, because as operations becomes comfortable, to hark back to that Telefonica comment, as the environment begins to transition to be less about the physical network and more about the virtual network or some combination thereof, there will be more confidence in the IT company's ability to play a greater role here and manage the transition to NFV and SDN, even better, manage the making it operational, and then driving it to another level. We're seeing even today BT talking about containerization of services. We're talking about hearing this year microservices coming from AT&T. There are further on best practices in virtualization and cloud delivery that the IT players, frankly, have an edge on, at least in scale of personnel and scale of delivery and proof points from other environments, and that is eventually going to become increasingly important to operators. We don't believe it is important as it is today. Today it is, can we stand up NFV SDN and make it work in our environment on traditional functions? Get that check marked. Can we do it in an improved way to innovate services on a microservice basis, to invent new ways to deliver service, new kinds of service? Next. And who might they turn to for that next would be the IT players. That said, I think there's things that the IT players can do to improve this perception, and certainly there is a lot of activity the OEMs are doing to defend this perception. So we highlight a few here. We highlight these because there's a commonality among these 6 players. They are mostly OEMs. We see the majority IT player HP in there, although HP has a strong legacy business coming from its communications business, so perhaps they're not quite as pure IT. And these are all striving very strongly to be end-to-end solution players, particularly in NFV. They are all trying and successfully tapping the platformers, going to the data center with offers and solutions, as well as going to the CTO and talking about the CTO needs to help bridge this gap of understanding between what telcos require and what IT requires. The expansion into IT for companies like in data center for companies like Ericsson is a profound change for that company, but necessary, being pulled there essentially by their operator base. The completeness of what they're doing on the OSS/BSS side also helps there. So a lot of the impressions around Ericsson that are favorable are also attributed to the moves the company's made, being able to address all the circumstances from NFV to cloud, to SDN, to data center, to OSS/BSS. We also see a commonality here that all these companies understand that the operator is not about domains. The operator is in transformational mode. So the way in which these firms go to market is as transformers, enablers of the transformation. Other firms that might be taking a domain approach aren't going to be getting as much traction at scale as these players, we believe. So understanding it, even though you can look at any of these and understand they have very well-defined own solutions to many of the problems that NFV and SDN pose, the way they're going to market is to say, we are going to help you transform to the state you'd like to transform to. Yes, we have a supermarket for you to help with that transformation, but we're willing to work with, we see you require us to work with each other, with other third parties and multi-vendor solutions, and across the network stack and across the various domains. So there's that take-up of a transformation enabler stance across all of these. And the last thing is there's a recognition that, hey, maybe this is still about hardware as well as software, x86 hardware, hyperscale hardware, as well as software. So short-term new hardware buy on the way to consolidating the proprietary hardware on the way to a more software-defined environment. So we see the hardware rollout by Ericsson. We see Huawei certainly being end-to-end that way, HP, that plays HP's strength, Cisco as well. And then the combination of Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia to complete that picture of that supermarket and that transformation. Part of it is a merger of necessity to make the cost economics work for Alcatel-Lucent, but it's going to also fill out the portfolio for Nokia and Alcatel-Lucent to be on par with the other players on this field. Alcatel-Lucent bringing the IP infrastructure and Nokia be able to manage the work that's been done on the NFV side as well, and particularly virtual base stations, as well as its own data center hardware. So there's a complete solution approach to transformation these players have evidenced as winning strategies it's a good strategy in a marketplace that has a lot of evolutionary steps to take, so it's not clear where, by focusing on a single domain or before focusing on a single platform, it's going to be successful. Much better to approach it with a broader brush approach. We also believe systems integration, having a strong services arm is going to be very important to this, and there we can see some differentiation. So we can see companies like Accenture having a play for that reason. We can see Ericsson perhaps standing out here as the strong services player, maybe with HP a little bit as well. We see a little bit of lower profile in services to date for the Cisco's, Huawei's, Alcatel-Lucent's, and Nokia's, with varying strategies about where to strategically bulk up services, if not be a holistic multi-vendor services player in the manner of an Ericsson or an HP or an Accenture. So that's some of the nuance for what we see in some winning strategies with some of the larger players participating in the market. So I want to conclude just with spend a little bit of time on questions, but have a highlight of this information all comes from our 3 research streams. We are doing a market landscape which constantly looks at the ecosystem of NFV and SDN and analyzes the interaction of the players. So where are the vendors bringing product to market? Where are the standards groups bringing contributions to the market, generally with the support of the operators and the suppliers? And then where are the operators positioned, and how is that all working together so we can be able to understand it as a holistic landscape, because this, more than any other area, has very much an ecosystem development flavor to it rather than just something one operator or one supplier does on their own. Second research stream you've seen is market forecast, and I've talked to the methodology of that. And then last, we've spent a lot of time highlighting our customer study. And as you can see, we're sequencing them across multiple research products across the year because we feel like this is a very dynamic environment. So we want to compare how the market changes on this quarterly cadence with one of these or more of these research vehicles, understanding that the forecasting will change as to where the key investments are being made. The adoption is going to change, follow how well that develops, how quickly that develops, and then how the ecosystem continues to evolve. So with that, I want to conclude the presentation. There's a little bit of information here on our total portfolio. This fits in within the telecom practice where we cover operators and vendors across all the major areas, not just NFV and SDN. But go from there to talk a little bit about highlighting some of the companies we cover, basically all the major operators and vendors, and conclude with opening the floor to questions.
All right, thanks, Michael. So we got about 5 minutes here for questions. Just a reminder, please send your questions to the Q&A. And the chat function is just easier for us to sort through. So let's get started. First question, what is beyond SDN and NFV? If VNF proliferation happens in the next 4 to 5 years in both SP and enterprise, what do you think the new pain point will be for virtualized networks?
Orchestration and automation at a level of efficiency and capability. So the way I see, we are at a fairly early state of maturity or immaturity on the orchestration and the operationalizing of all these VNFs and SDNs. So it will be software defined. Can it be more efficient? That will be a key question. Can it be run efficiently? And I'm not talking about the way in which the cloud's efficient today, cloud services, but can it be efficient at what I would call mission critical capabilities? And I consider mission critical for telco to be the traditional kinds of reliability SLAs they're expecting, even though it's fulfilled with a different technical architecture, and the kind of mission critical services that have yet to really penetrate it in the cloud. So that's the next step. And I believe that has to do more with the orchestration and automation, the meta layers above the virtualization itself to deliver on that. And that, I think, is a big challenge. I think the underlying infrastructure of microservices and containers is going to continue to evolve and make that more efficient.
All right. Next question. How will NFV and SDN impact OSS, BSS?
So OSS BSS needs to be, in many cases, transformed. I wouldn't say there are many operators that are ready to have their systems that are used to collecting data from physical networks adapt to virtual networks. And that's fine. Adapters can be delivered, interfaces can be created, but again, we come to the efficiency standpoint. Is there a consolidated inventory module that can understand and integrate and make available to the service provisioning process the physical network and the virtual network? Is there a data model that recognizes a logical view of the network across these instances? So there's lots of work to be done to moderate the interfaces between OSS, BSS, and in some cases transform the key parts of OSS, BSS that needs to be aware of. Now we're dealing with a different kind of network, a network on demand. And so a lot of activity there on the OSS, BSS side relative to integration with Nano, relative to understanding the hybrid physical and virtual network.
All right, so we're running out of time here. I think we got time for one last question. All right, when do you expect commercial deployment of VCPE and which telco?
So we're already seeing it, I guess, people as varied as AT&T and cable and wireless. There's a number of other cases I could list, probably half a dozen commercial VCPEs already. Most of them around enterprise, where we're looking for a better way to allow the intelligence to be carried out from the edge of the network rather than at the CPE, allowing a lower cost investment at the CPE, and by the way, an upsell of services from the edge. Already happening, and we can follow up with additional examples, but that one has been, I would call that the commercial deployment use case of the year so far.
All right, so I think that's all we have time for. So I'd like to thank Michael for your time with your presentation today, and thank you everyone for your questions. I know we got a lot we didn't get to, so we'll follow up with a lot of you after the presentation. You can follow Michael as well as TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here. Please check out our pages on YouTube and SlideShare to check out our previously aired webinars. Just a reminder, I will be following up with all of you via email tomorrow afternoon with the slides from today's presentation as well as the recording for today's link, so please be on the lookout for that. Additionally, before you sign off, we'd like to ask you to take a very brief survey on the information we provided today. We're always looking to improve both the quality of the information we provide and how we provide it to you, so your feedback is greatly appreciated. We'll leave the chat function open for another minute or so for people to ask any last-minute questions or comments. Otherwise, thanks for attending, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.